and welcome to today's episode of Authentic Achievements, where it's my absolute delight to be joined by the fabulous Becky Freemal. Becky, welcome.
Wow, that was such an introduction. Thank you so much, Camille. I appreciate it.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation, and I know from our chat just before we came live that we could get stuck in really quickly. So before we do it, let me just share with our audience a little bit more about you, Becky. So you're an Emmy-winning journalist and best-selling author, and you help businesses grow through evidence-based brand strategies that connect with people. As a fractional CMO and keynote speaker, you bring storytelling expertise to tech, SaaS, and finance companies, building marketing blueprints that drive results. She specializes in transforming complex topics into data-driven narratives that resonate with target audiences. Author of Brand Voice, People Plus Data Drive Results. You demonstrate that storytelling isn't just a soft skill, it's essential for business success. And through speaking engagements and direct consultation, you empower teams to bridge data and human connection for meaningful impact. I just love it. I love the fact that actually you're doing that connection between data and people, because I always have thought that, the problems turn up in the data, but they manifest in the people. And we tend not to make that link. But before we get stuck into that, Becky, could you bring your journey to life for us? Because it's quite an unusual journey, isn't it?
I think you just need to be in life, be ready to pivot, or even if you're not, be willing to pivot. And that has been kind of the story on a high level of my life, even long before my career world. And I got out of college and I, do or die, I wanted to be a journalist. That's what I wanted to do. I love talking to people. I love meeting new people. I love telling their stories and learning about their stories. But in the broadcast journalism world, your goal is to constantly try and go up the ladder. So you start in little tiny towns in the United States that no one has ever heard of, including myself. And I say, sure, I'll move there and, have that willingness. And then you always have your eye on the prize of like the big three, for example, like New York, LA, Chicago. And as I was inching ever so closer to those markets, I started to realize actually it's the same thing. It's just more people watching, but you're still telling the same stories. And the stories that you're telling them for, they deserve them just as much in tiny town USA as they do in New York City or wherever. And so as I went through that process, I was on air for, in broadcast news for about 24, 25 years. I felt like the challenge was starting to go away. And the idea of climbing the ladder again was no different. Again, just more people watching, but I was doing the same thing. And I thought there's got to be a different way to tell stories and to help people in a completely different vertical, a different industry. So I started looking and I discovered that what I wanted was to keep one foot firmly rooted in an area I knew, which was storytelling. And building those really evidence-based stories. We're not talking about fictional storytelling, but true stories, genuine stories. And then one foot in an area that I just didn't know where it was. What is this new step going to be? And let's learn. And so that's what I did. And so I put the new step at that time in biotechnology. I was at a research institute. And it was an amazing, amazing place. Kim, it was so cool to meet the researchers, to learn what they were doing. But what I really have discovered is I've done biotech and I've done financial institutions and I've done academia and medical and military device technology. I mean, you name it. No matter what, my one foot is always firmly planted in that area that I love, which is that storytelling and helping each one of those verticals and those industries connect with the people that they're meant to impact, because they have a great solution. These people have problems that they need to solve, challenges. And my job as a marketer and a growth strategist is to make sure they connect. It's really that simple. It's like being a journalist, but for business.
Oh, I love that. I've always thought that the one thing that connects us all, irrelevant of our age, race, culture, or gender, is the fact that we teach and we learn through stories. We've done it since the caveman drawings. And so if we can create the right story, then we can teach the right lesson, can't we? We can teach the piece that we want to pass on. And that's so important in business, because you're right. So many people have got a great solution, but they're not being heard by their customers because they're not talking to them. They're not creating that compelling story that allows the customer to buy in to go, oh, that's me. That's what I want to do. And so I love that you were able to take that passion for storytelling and that passion for making sure, to your point, that they are real, authentic stories that are based, that are not just let's create a nice made up story. It's not fiction,
Right.
but actually really start to hone in. So, and what I'd love to know is, obviously, as we now move into an ever evolving and more technically advanced and AI driven space. How do you help companies to maintain that authentic connection?
That's where the people plus data part really starts to surface, because you look at their data, both their quantitative and their qualitative. Look at revenue, look at profit margins. What is the difference between the two? Are they spending too much on supply chain? Are they not spending enough somewhere so that they can, grow and drive business? Maybe they're more than one product line. So then you want to start looking at which one's bringing in the biggest profit margins. And of course, the one that's bringing in the largest isn't always the one that you stick with if they're looking to streamline. But you really dive into the data, because it starts to tell you that story. And then as an organization, as a company, you really start to, your purpose, you have your core values, you have this why, but is the data matching what you want to do? And then you start to meld that. And when you start to look at that data, and it helps to inform what aspects of your why are really taking off, it really helps you build that genuine story. And I always say, it's got to be genuine, because, how many times have we met, just like personify a company? How many times have we met someone who came out and they're like, I don't know, hey, big guy, I like your tie. And they're like a slick sales guy or something. And you're like, ooh, just feels so disingenuous. The idea is the data really will help put you down that path of being a genuine story.
Oh, I love that, because it's true, isn't it? We've all had those, we've all had those moments where you're like, really?
Yeah.
I remember working with a guy once, and I used to call him the lick me, I taste of chocolate guy. I don't know if you remember over here in the UK, we had a Lynx advert, and they sprayed Lynx and they immediately turned into chocolate. I don't know why, but he used to sit around like that, and you'd be like, nobody believes that. Like, nobody believes that. Nobody's bought into the fact that you're interested. And people at their core, I think, want to be listened to, understood, and respected. So it doesn't mean you can't ever disagree, but disagree, don't disrespect. And I think that is, I think it's something that as we become much more technically driven, actually the desire for authenticity is greater. Would you agree?
I do. I think that as you move, and I think as you move through life, you move through your business, no matter where you're going, you just realize the people who are disingenuous, the organizations who are disingenuous, they slough off. They don't retain their worth, and they're not worth your time or your energy. And then when you find the people who are truly in the business, that authentically and genuinely want to help you with the solution, that's where those really strong partnerships and bonds take off.
I love that, because I think that is it, isn't it? We want to create connections. We want to create connections that help us all grow. For that to work, we've got to be ourselves. We've got to bring our whole self to the equation. Only then can we find out where our real connections lie.
I say that all the time. I always said that to my teams when I used to, as you know, I work for my own I started my own company, but when I had bigger teams in organizations that I led, I would say, whether you admit it or not, you bring your whole self to work every day. You bring your whole self everywhere you go. And I think the best cultures and the best companies are the ones who recognize that.
Yeah, I love that, because I always say to people, wherever you go, you go. You don't leave a bit of you behind. It's like, I've tried outrunning myself. I'm always there. It's like, oh, there you are again. And those parts where we say, like, I grew up in the world of, like, you leave your problems at the door. Well, you can't, because your emotional brain responds 24 times faster than your thinking brain. So by the time you think, oh, I should have left that at the door, it's too late. It's in. It's already there. So you've kind of got to work with the whole of who you are, and recognize that as a result of that, you're going to have to work with the whole of the people that you're working with as well, because the same is true. And as you say, that creating that culture where that's what's expected. That's good, because then we can actually start to really collectively grow, because we're not wasting time trying to work out the bit that's missing, because we all know something's not quite right, don't we? And then we waste valuable brain time trying to work out what it is.
Well, and the data alone, it tells you, it gets you in the thinking mode, and it's perfect and it's needed. But the data alone is not what connects and builds that emotion. Emotion and feelings are what connect people. And so if you stop short and just do data, which I've seen it all. I've seen businesses who only do the data. I see people who don't have data but are going by gut. And I'm like, you really need both for this equation to work. You need the data, you need to understand the stories, build that feeling. You know, when I got my my MBA I went back to school later in life, got my bachelor's back in the day, but then got my MBA later. And one of the things that resonated with me in my, oh gosh, it was our international business negotiation class or something, was this thing called the hierarchy of effects. And I just glommed onto it. It basically was this long list of like how the brain processes all the way through. But at a high level, they were in buckets and they were simple: think, feel, do. If you remember those three simple things, people think, but they don't do until they feel. That feels in the middle for a reason. So from that idea of storytelling and building those connections, you have to connect. You have to have a feeling about a person and the people behind the brick and mortar, because companies aren't just the brick and mortar or their website. There are people behind it. And that is where that feeling and that connection happens. So I tell people that all the time. If anything, just remember, think, feel, do. It's that progression, and you can't skip over the middle. Otherwise, you're not going to get the action at the end.
Oh, I love that. It's funny, isn't it, how often these things that we think are really, really complex come down to really simple steps. And the fact is that we're just missing one of them. You know,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
you're doing this really well, but you're not going to get there because you've not done the connecting piece for people. And I think that is what the story does, isn't it? It helps to connect the dots for people. It helps them to see why it's important and what it's going to give them, and therefore that is going to be what makes them take action, because we don't like change, do we? So sorry, the dog's decided to join in. Pudding.
Hi, puppy. I love it.
He's a nightmare. But at least the show's called Authentic Achievement, so we are
Right.
The dog likes to join in. I think for me, they're often the bits. And do you find that with businesses that you help, that they're expecting it to be a much harder solution, and yet the reality is they're just missing an element of bringing that story to life?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you know, when I first left the world of journalism and went into businesses, I definitely got a vibe from a lot of people that they were, you know, the data driven folks, especially all data, all data, all data, and kind of like, oh, that's cute, you're a storyteller. And no one ever said that word, but you know, it was that kind of pat feel. And at first I thought, okay, I'll play your game. I'm gonna, you know, I am a storyteller, but let me really lean into the data. So that's when I went back and got my MBA and really did a lot of data driven type ideas and concepts and projects. And the more I leaned into the data, the more I realized how desperately these people needed the storytelling. And it's funny because some people don't have to go through an entire MBA program to come to this, but I like to dive deep. And so I did. And now I understand the data well, but I understand even more how important that storytelling is. And I think people are like, oh, storytelling, we hear it everywhere. And I laugh because I think, gosh, at the beginning, people are like, oh, storytelling, whatever. Now everyone's like, oh, storytelling, that's what everyone talks about. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. Storytelling is a must. And again, it's a power skill. It's essential to get business. And the sooner people realize how to marry that data that they have, the people that they have to create those wonderful stories, that I think the sooner they'll take off. And I've seen it. I've seen it happen time and time again.
I love that, because I think it's true, isn't it? We sometimes have you mentioned before, the little like pat on the head moments, and you know, I've definitely had those before. I remember being in one meeting and the CFO turned around and was like, oh, well, it's all right for you, Kim, because you do the fluffy people stuff, don't you? I was like, oh, do the fluffy people stuff. And that fluffy people stuff put £600,000 on your bottom line in the last 3 months based on your statistics.
Yes.
And you went, oh, you're not that fluffy, are you? Went, not really, no. I said, but you can't have one without the other. I said, like, you won't get the result unless you get the people on board so that they know the part they play and they're given permission to be part of the solution. And you can only do that if they understand how, where you're going, what you're doing, and how they help, how they are involved in making that a reality for the people that they serve, which are your customers. So can you share with us a story of how you've helped an organization go on that journey? Because it can be hard, can't it, to lead them from that it's all about the numbers into that world of actually, no, if you don't do both of these elements, you are going to hold yourself back.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked at with one organization. I met the CFO and the chief financial officers, or just the financial teams in general, tend to be my favorite people because their brains think differently than mine does. And so together we really can affect change, and it's fun. It's cool to see. And this particular CFO, he just got it. He understood. And so I went to him to get some of the data. But what was funny is we as a whole were with an organization who didn't quite understand that marketing and that we would need this information. And so he went to the executive vice president and he was like, Becky wants, our profit margins and our revenue. Is it okay if I give her that data? And they're like, yeah, give it to her. So it was a good culture at that, at that particular place. And so people were willing to share and give and flow. And the things that we were able to do when we were able to sit down and take the financial team and take the chief financial officer, and then we had internal and external team members on the marketing side, and putting that all together. Is it an overnight success? No. And I think if you're looking for that, it's not. What I do is I build sustainable growth. That's my goal, is to build a really strong foundation. And so what happened is over the course of the first 6 months to a year, we built brand awareness. Really, we changed our tagline, and we just really did a lot of less data and more personal feel to it. Got that brand awareness out, and then we're like, okay, we're ready. We've got numbers, and we won't get into all the gory details, but there are different, KPIs and data and indicators you track and all the metrics. And when we got to a point where we're like, okay, people are watching, people are paying attention, let's start converting this. Let's start evolving this into the conversion marketing campaign. And one of our go-to-market campaigns, we ended up getting it out first. So it was a first to market, and we drove 70 something, I'll say 70 plus, put it that way, $70+ million to that one campaign alone. And I would tell you that first to market conversion campaign was such a success because we built such a strong storytelling brand awareness platform from which you can launch so many different tactics and do it well. So yeah, that was a really exciting time to watch that happen and to see it go down, and to know that what marketing did, because we also, some of our metrics, we did it based on our own marketing tactics. So we could track exactly how much came directly because of our marketing efforts. And then all of it came from just building that brand awareness. So,
because it's really important, isn't it, that we build that trust, because people want to buy from people that they trust. And that can be the part that's harder to do, isn't it? People want an overnight success, but actually you've got to put the effort in to build the trust, to build the that knowing. People want to feel like they know that they're working with, that they've got a good value fit for where they're going, and that takes time because it needs to be consistent, doesn't it? So that you go, oh, it always shows up that way. So how can people start that journey?
You can start, and it depends. It's such a customized answer because, as we know, there are solopreneurs out there, and their data is going to be wildly different than maybe 100 million in revenue corporation. But data is where you want to start, and you want to start with the data and the people. I'm working with a client now that we just did a strategic growth intensive, which is kind of how I onboard and get right in to a client work. And that involved giving them a document that answered a ton of questions, about profit margins and about revenue and about marketing campaigns and what worked, what didn't, how much you brought in. We really get into the details of all the different aspects. But then once we get all of that data written down, we then bring all the people to the table. And that can either be a legitimate in-person table or it can be a virtual call table. And I start asking, you have to ask the right questions. So I start to ask the right questions of those people. And again, that's a big part of where my journalism background comes in. And you ask them the right questions about the data that they've presented. And it really it's fun because what you're really doing is plopping those right questions in to allow them to come up with the answers. I go into those sessions knowing very strongly what the strategy should be and where it's headed. And it's fun when they start to realize, oh, hey, we could do. I'm like, yes, you could. That's exactly what you could do, or start to stray down a path of like, hey, our vision and our goal for our 1 or 3 or 10-year goals this way, but our marketing was bringing us this way. It's fun when they start to realize that. And they're like, wait a minute, we actually need to do these tactics. And I'm like, yes, it's just fun. And that's so important. As you said, people want to be seen and they want to be heard. And if you give them that opportunity at the very, very beginning, that buy-in happens at the most integral part, which is at the end when it's launched. And when you get to that point, people say, gosh, no one's helping. And we don't have our brand ambassadors and they're not out there really sharing our brand voice with the world. And I'm like, because you never asked them from the beginning. They didn't buy into it. So that buy-in is so important in the very first step all the way through. And you also said people do business with people they trust. And I say that in my brand voice book all the time. People do business with people they know, like, and trust. And if you want to take the know, like, and trust off, people do business with people, period. People. That is such an important part of it. So.
That's so true. And it just reminds me, I had a conversation with a client just the other week, and he was like, oh, Kim, business is tough. And I was like, okay, so to talk to me about it, tell me where we're going. He went, well, he said, I've got suppliers. I went, well, they're people. And I've got colleagues, people. I've got clients, people. I've got business partners, people. I've got the board, they're people. I said, even the regulators are people. I said, what you've got is a people problem. Actually, what you need is to have a good people strategy of how are you finding out what's important to them?
Yeah.
Do you know what's on their wish list, and whether or not what you're doing might actually help them to achieve it? We're only going to know that if you ask. But we seem to almost have it reminds me of that part of The Sound of Music where he says we've got we've got a deplorable lack of curiosity. I think that's what we have, isn't it? It is, we've stopped being curious about other people, and yet once we get curious about what's important to them, what are they trying to achieve, we're better able to share how we can help them to achieve that. And I love in what you're doing is you bring those people, everybody in at the start, because actually if they're not there at the start, it's being done to them, not being done by them. And therefore they're more likely to kick against it, aren't they? Because they didn't have a say. They didn't have a feeling like actually they were part of the solution. They are recognized as being able to help solve this rather than sit there and wait to be spoon-fed. And that's such a vital thing, isn't it, in building high-performing teams?
I had a client and a company that I worked with that had done the opposite. And actually, this particular one that I'm thinking of, I was a W-2 for this particular client. It was when I was still working for him. And our intranet, the internal, way everyone communicated, was a little bit of a hot mess. I'm not going to lie. And we had gone through multiple CEOs, and each one, we kept pushing from the marketing side. We really got to get this fixed because internal and external communication it all flows together. And so that was under our umbrella. And, one CEO after the next, nope, we got more important things to do. So then we get to our third CEO, and that particular CEO walked in and lost his mind. Was like, this is horrible. Why haven't you fixed it? And, we've all been there. We've all been those companies. Oh my gosh, we tried. No one wants to do it. But I tell you all that because what happened was through complete emotion and aggravation and not fact-based, let's just come, like you said, people react with their emotion because it happens faster than their thinking brain. And this was a great example where we sat there in a meeting and he explained that he jumped over, well, he didn't say it like this, but he basically leapfrogged over me and asked this man in a part of the company that knows nothing about intranets or that do marketing communication to take care of it because we hadn't done it prior, and it had to be done. I said, well, again, you just got here. The other CEOs did not find this important. And him exactly what you would expect happened. They didn't bring in the people at the beginning. They didn't ask people like, hey, what do you need for the intranet? This needs to work for all of us. They plowed straight ahead. We just got to get it done fast, kind of, again, a lot of emotion involved in it. I watched it all go down. And about 8 months later, they brought it back to me and my team and said, this doesn't work. You need to fix it. I was like, yes. It doesn't surprise me that it doesn't work, and trying to fix it now instead of doing it the right way from the beginning is going to be way more difficult. So I've seen the good and the bad.
Yeah, I think I think we've probably had similar experiences because over the years, you've seen people do things really, really well, and you've seen people go, no, why would you do it that way?
Yes.
That is just not going to work with the people, and then them get very frustrated when it doesn't work, and be like, well, they're just ungrateful. Well, no, they're not ungrateful. You got it wrong. You didn't involve them. You didn't include them. You didn't ask them any questions. You didn't find out what was really going on in their world to know whether or not you were fixing the right things or whether or not you were just fixing the things you thought were the right things, which is. It doesn't never harms, does it, to ask a question? It's like if you think this is the answer, ask the question, see how it lands before you actually decide we're all running that way, and they're like weirdos. what are they doing? Because it's so hard then to bring it back, isn't it? It's so hard. But I wonder, and I'd welcome your thoughts on it. I wonder whether part of that is because as leaders, we've told leaders for years that they have to know all of the answers, so they daren't show the fact that they might not have all of the answers, by asking more questions and be willing to learn and evolve, because that feels too vulnerable. Does that resonate with what you've seen?
Yes. I mean, yes. Does it ever resonate? And I think it goes back to, obviously lots of people make wonderful employees and hires in the working world, but that is one of the very reasons I tell people journalists make such great hires, because they just understand the importance of listening and asking the right questions. And they've done it long enough that they know how to ask the right questions. And that is such an important aspect, I think, of any business, corporate, nonprofit. Doesn't have to be in journalism. That is the foundation of launching those successful projects, is asking the right questions and of the right people. So don't ask someone in finance a marketing question or vice versa. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of something off the top of my head. But, you need to know, just like you as a business owner or corporate CEO need to connect to the right people on the other end customer-wise, it's no different inside, in your own organization, in your own four walls, how you talk to one another, making sure you're asking the right questions of the right people. You might find out you have a rock star marketer tucked away in some other area, or some rock star accountant tucked away in marketing. You know what I mean? Like, that's the right questions. You can really affect change and really build an amazing team.
Oh, I love that. It's so true. Yeah, I always thought, and I started out as a hairdresser. And as a hairdresser, they taught you to listen to understand what the person was trying to achieve, to help them to achieve it, and have them leave you feeling the very best version of themselves. And that for me was leadership. That was like, if I could do that in every role that I've ever done, then be a good leader, because people will want to follow you because they're being listened to, and you're helping them achieve what it is that they're trying to achieve. So not quite as quite journalism, but it's a similar kind of thing, isn't it? You've got to really listen to this. Becky, I could literally chat to you all day. I can't believe where the time's gone.
I know, right? Time is flying.
So you've already shared such amazing insight, but if I could ask you, if you had to go back and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
It's funny. We kind of were talking about this before the podcast, because I have an opportunity to go speak to my alma mater coming up, my high school, an all-girls school in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I've had a little bit of time to think about it. And I think really it's no different than the advice that I tell myself now every day, all day long. It's remain curious. If you remain curious, in fact, I am, a solopreneur. So my values aren't really for my large company. They're more for my clients, but mine are to remain curious, speak to people, not about people, and to be welcoming of others. And I think it's really important to know what those values are, and that they've come from a place of genuine curiosity. So I think remain curious is the best. And Kim Adele, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I really learned this was, again, everything. It's kind of like everything you needed to learn, you learned in kindergarten. Everything I needed to learn, I learned in journalism. But if you remain curious, you're in scenarios where people are really emotional. There's some really tough places that I've been as a journalist. And you don't want to expel the emotion or ignore the emotion. It's very much a part of the story. But when it comes to your questions and getting to the facts, you have to remain curious, because if you remain curious and focus on getting the information, you're able to, in that moment, cut through the noise and cut through the emotion and get right to the meat of the situation. And I have used that skill with so many people in the corporate world, in real life. Remaining curious has gotten me through some really tight spots. And I think for my high school students that I'll be talking to, I think, you have the mean girl syndrome, or you have people who aren't so kind, or bullies. And when they're being bullies, maybe just remain curious. Like, realize it's not like, because if you absorb it, then you feel like it's about you. But if you flip it and you remain curious, then you've kind of taken the upper hand in a good way, not like in a power trip way, but in a good way of remaining curious, asking the questions, and finding out where all of that is coming from. So that's a long answer. Remain curious is my short answer.
I love that. My daughter and I did a family mission statement a couple of years ago. And our family mission statement is to live a life of passionate curiosity, and to pass our thoughts, words, and deeds through the lenses of, is it kind, is it honest, and does it add value? And as long as we do that, then actually we can keep moving forward and adding value. So that's your answer so resonates with us. Because I think it is, once we're curious about things, then actually we can observe them more than absorb them. And I think that is where the real opportunity is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And that's what it's always about. You will always advance yourself if you remain curious, because you're always learning something new.
I love that. So, Becky, before we go, can you share with the audience how they can get in touch with you and who you help?
Yeah, absolutely. So BeckyFreemal.com is the website. So you can go there, and there's a contact form there if they just want to reach out that way. And, who I help are companies. I mean, for the data, quantitative data side, I would tell you anywhere from, say, maybe about 10 million on up for gross revenue. Those are the companies that are often, and it can be a little lower, but, you'll find that's where CEOs are like, okay, I feel like I'm doing everything and I need to let go and start bringing in other people. So I come in and I'll help a CEO free up their time by helping them with their growth and marketing strategy, so they can turn their sights to growing the company with all the other different departments and people that they need to lead. So that's from the quantitative, the number. Qualitative, I just kind of leaned into that by saying that, helping CEOs free up their time. And leadership, who they're ready. They're like, let's do it. Let's do the thing. Those are the people that I love to help. I tend to spend most of my time in the tech vertical and in that industry, fintech, SaaS, ed tech. But everyone deserves to have their story heard. And if they need help building that story to then get it on the right marketing channels, I don't say no. I don't. I'm truly a journalist, and I never, as a journalist, said, sorry, you're not in the vertical. Sorry, I only report on crime. I don't, and only this one kind of crime. I do it across the board, but tech does tend to be the one that I connect with a lot.
I love that. And for anybody listening and watching, if you didn't have time to scribble all of that down, all the ways to connect with Becky are in the show notes below. So please just take a look there and connect and continue the story. Becky, thank you so very much for coming on and sharing your journey and your insight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
And to everybody listening and watching, I hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as I have. And until next time, take care.